Today I'm working on a steel chainsaw that I purchased at a pawn shop. This saw refuses to idle or run properly, and it seems low on power. So I did some research online and I ordered a replacement carb specific for this model. If you're not working on an MS-171 steel, then some of these steps may be different and the carb might not look the same. I'll keep this as a high-level overview of a carb replacement on any two-stroke, and it should be close enough to follow along. First step, obviously, is to gain access to the carb. On this saw, it'll be removing the top cover, and then the air filter, some hardware securing the air filter box and the carb. On this motor, I found that if you pry up on the choke and dislodge it from its mount, you can then align the hole in the carb to get the wire to come out. Now you can remove the carb by sliding it off the posts. I like to compare it to my new part to make sure that I got the same thing. Just a note on ordering parts online, since this is a steel saw, I couldn't get any name brand steel parts for this without going to a dealer, and I didn't want to pay those prices. So I did order aftermarket, and the first one that I got didn't work and it was defective. I did order from another place at a price that was a little more than the first one and ended up with a good one. So I found out the hard way that the fuel line to this carb is molded into place and automatically comes unplugged when you slide the carb back. The fuel began leaking everywhere here, so I cleaned it up. Now you can just reverse the order in which you took it apart, use all the same hardware, put it all in the same holes. Remember that some of these parts are plastic, so you don't have to over tighten things with Gorilla Torque. Just snug things up with common sense and move on. If that makes you uncomfortable, a dealer or a service center might be able to advise you on what those torques should be. There's nothing more annoying than unreliable equipment. So we're going to go through the steps on how to properly adjust a two-stroke engine. Too rich and it'll smoke. You'll have low power and excessive carbon buildup in the exhaust. But if you get it too lean, it'll be low on power and it's more likely to cause engine damage. The perfect carb setting will allow the engine to produce the most power, extend its life, produce minimal smoke, idle smoothly, and rev quickly. To go a little more in depth, an over-rich carb adjustment is when the air-fuel mixture is so high that the fuel won't burn completely. This partially burned mixture exits the exhaust and causes carbon buildup over time. On the flip side, a lean carb adjustment is when the air-fuel mixture is too low, and that's not enough fuel to burn. This makes low power, excessive RPMs, and bearing issues with possible piston lockup in the future. It's like running a car with no coolant or oil. Filters for the air and the fuel should be checked, fuel age, mix ratio, and carbon buildup in the exhaust, all before making any carb adjustments. I personally use a pre-mixed ethanol-free fuel just to prevent issues and prolong the life of all the rubber parts, hoses, and carb seals on all my two-stroke equipment. Most chainsaws out there will have 3 carb adjustment screws. The first one is the idle speed or throttle stop, usually marked with a LA. If this adjustment's set too low, the engine will die when the throttle trigger is released. If it's set too high, the high idle speed will engage the clutch and the chain will run at idle. The second one is the low speed jet, marked with an L. It sets the air-fuel mixture at idle. An adjustment too rich here will cause it to die at idle. Too lean will starve and surge RPM levels. An extremely lean condition here can also cause the engine to die. The last screw is the high-speed jet, marked with an H. This controls your air-fuel mixture at cutting speed. An adjustment too rich here will impact the RPM, cause sluggish throttle response and smoke. Too lean and it will cause the excessive RPMs, low power in the cut, and hotter temps. Carb adjustments will be required anytime you replace a carb or if you've been jacking with the screws and you just can't get the thing to run right. It's best to start with the fuel adjustment settings 1 turn out. So gently screw them onto the seats and then back them out 1 full turn. Now you're ready to start the engine and let it warm up. If it won't idle, warm it up by squeezing the throttle just a little. If you try to make adjustments on a cold engine, it'll be off after it warms up, so it's best just to warm it up. After it's warm, start with the idle speed marked LA. Try to set the speed so that the saw idles as high as possible without engaging the clutch. If it still won't idle, just go on to the next step. Next, we'll set the low speed jet, so you slowly turn it in until the engine surges and starves for fuel. Then slowly back it back out. The engine will start to run better, and then it'll get worse again. Slowly reverse and turn it back in to the spot where it idles best. It should be somewhere in between those 2 marks. If there's any doubt, it's always better to be a little on the rich side. Once you think you're in the right spot, pull the throttle, and it should rev without stumbling, and then return back to idle. At this point, I usually go back to the idle screw, and I set it as high as possible without the chain moving or the clutch engaging. Just remember, an adjustment to any screw will affect the perfect spot on every other screw, and so you have to revisit this a few times. Now go back to the beginning and start with the first screw again, and then the second, and then the third, until you're happy with all 3 of them. Some people like to have their idle a little bit lower, and it's okay to do that if your saw will reliably rev from that lower idle. I hope this helps somebody out there. Remember, if your saw doesn't act like this, then you have something other than carb problems going on. Anything with a 2-stroke motor on it will be exactly the same procedure for adjusting the carb, so feel free to use this across the board.